$500,000 sat on a cold glass table between them, a life-changing sum that could buy a future or sell a soul. And for Nia Brooks, it was the only thing standing between her little brother Marcus and a grave, because his heart was failing and the surgery was impossible without this money. But the woman sitting across from her auntie, Vera, the matriarch of the Kim Empire, didn't care about Marcus or Nia. She only cared about control, and she pushed a small amber bottle of pills across the table with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, telling Nia that the deal came with conditions specifically regarding her stepson Julian Kim, the man the tabloids called the Broken Prince, a man who was rumored to be blind, mentally unstable, and dangerous after a tragic accident 3 years ago. Yet Vera's voice dropped to a whisper as she explained that Julian was difficult and these vitamins were to keep him calm and compliant, essentially asking Nia to drug her future husband into a stupor, which made Nia's stomach turn, but the image of her brother gasping for air in that charity ward forced her hand, so she swallowed her pride, grabbed the check and the pills, and signed the contract that would bind her to a monster she had never met. Before we dive into this twisted tale of deception and romance, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss a single second of this drama. The Kim mansion was less of a home and more of a mausoleum built of black marble and cold silence, standing on a cliff overlooking the ocean where the waves crashed violently against the rocks, much like Nia's racing heart, as she was led down a long dark corridor by a butler who refused to make eye contact, eventually stopping at a heavy oak door that looked like the entrance to a dungeon, leaving her there with nothing but her suitcase and the weight of her sins. Nia pushed the door open to reveal a room shrouded in darkness with heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the afternoon sun, and the air smelling faintly of sandalwood and old pain. And there in the center of the room, sitting in a high-backed leather chair facing the window, was Julian Kim, wearing dark sunglasses inside a pitch-black room, his hands resting on a silver-handled cane with a stillness that was unnatural, almost predatory. Nia stepped inside, her breath hitching in her throat as she introduced herself, trying to keep her voice steady. But the man didn't move a muscle, didn't turn his head, didn't acknowledge her existence. He just sat there like a statue carved from ice, and Nia wondered if the rumors were true, if he was truly gone mentally, leaving her alone with a shell of a man. She looked at the glass of water sitting on the side table, and then felt the weight of the pill bottle in her pocket, remembering Vera's instructions to give him 2 immediately to ensure he slept through the night, and the temptation to just do it, to take the money and save her brother, was overwhelming. But as she unscrewed the cap and looked at the small white tablets, she felt a wave of nausea, because Nia Brooks was many things: desperate, poor, exhausted. But she was not a killer, and she knew that. Keeping a man sedated against his will was a slow kind of murder, so with a trembling hand she capped the bottle and threw it into the metal trash can in the corner, the loud clang echoing in the silent room like a gunshot. She walked over to the man adjusting her dress and told him firmly that she wasn't going to drug him, that she didn't know what his stepmother was planning, but she wouldn't be a part of it. And even though he didn't respond, she felt better having said it out loud, not realizing that behind those dark opaque lenses Julian Kim's eyes were open, sharp, and fully focused on her reflection in the window, watching her every move, analyzing her defiance with a curiosity he hadn't felt in years, because everyone else Vera sent was a spy or an assassin, but this girl was different. The silence was broken hours later when a maid summoned them for dinner, a ritual that Julian apparently was forced to attend to amuse his tormentors, and Nia guided him down the grand staircase, feeling the tension radiate off his arm, which was hard as steel beneath his suit jacket, leading him into a dining room that dazzled with crystal chandeliers and hatred, where Auntie Vera sat at the head of the table like a queen, and her biological son Eric, a man who wore arrogance like a cheap cologne, sat opposite Julian, smirking as they entered. The dinner was a battlefield from the start, with Eric making loud comments about Julian's uselessness, asking if the new nurse was going to chew his food for him, while Vera sipped her wine and watched with amusement, and Julian just sat there stoic and silent, accepting the abuse, as if he deserved it, which made Nia's blood boil, because she had spent her whole life protecting her sick brother from bullies, and she knew exactly what this dynamic was. The breaking point came when Eric, laughing at his own cruel joke, picked up a hard bread roll and threw it directly at Julian's face, and Julian didn't flinch, didn't try to dodge. He just let it hit his cheek and fall into his lap, playing the role of the helpless blind invalid perfectly, while Eric howled with laughter, calling him a pathetic dog who couldn't even see it coming. Nia looked at Julian's face, seeing a muscle in his jaw tick just once, a tiny crack in his mask that only she noticed, and something inside her snapped. She didn't care about the money or the contract in that moment, she only cared about dignity. So when Eric slid a sharp steak knife across the polished mahogany table, spinning it dangerously close to Julian's hand, and told Nia to cut his meat before he stabbed himself in the eye again, Nia stood up so abruptly her chair screeched against the floor. She grabbed the steak knife not by the handle but by the blade's flat side and slammed the point down into the wood of the table just millimeters from Eric's hand with a thundering force that silenced the room, instantly making Eric jump back in genuine fear, his eyes wide as saucers, while Vera stood up in outrage, demanding to know who this servant thought she was speaking to. Nia leaned over the table, her voice low and trembling with a rage that terrified them, telling Eric that Julian might be blind, but Eric was ugly on the inside and there was no cure for that, and she warned them that if anyone threw anything at her husband again, she wouldn't miss next time, declaring that they were leaving because the air in the room stank of trash. She grabbed Julian's hand, pulling him up from the chair, and for the first time Julian allowed himself to be led, not because he needed it, but because he was stunned by the ferocity of this woman, this stranger, who had just declared war on the people who held her paycheck hostage just to defend a man she thought was broken. They walked back to the room in silence, the adrenaline slowly fading from Nia's system, leaving her shaking, as she opened his door and apologized softly, saying she just couldn't stand bullies, and offered to sneak into the kitchen later to get him some real food before leaving him alone to lock the door. Inside the safety of his room, Julian Kim stood in the center of the floor and slowly took off his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were clear, cold, and dangerous. He walked to the mirror, looking at the spot on his cheek where the bread had hit him, and then a slow, dark smile spread across his face, a smile that promised retribution, not for the bread but for the years of torture, because for the first time in 3 years someone had stood in front of him, instead of behind him, and he picked up his encrypted phone, dialing his private investigator with a single command to find out everything about Nia Brooks, because the game had just changed and the innocent wife he thought was a pawn might just be the queen he needed to win the war. But he didn't know yet that Vera was watching too, and that the stunt in the dining room had just put a target on Nia's back that was bigger than the check she had cashed. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet curtains, casting long dust-mote-filled beams across the room, where Nia Brooks woke up with a stiff neck on the uncomfortable Victorian chaise lounge she had claimed as her bed, because sharing the massive king-size mattress with a man she barely knew was a line she wasn't ready to cross yet, and as she rubbed the sleep from her eyes, she realized with a start that Julian was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed in a crisp white shirt that seemed too bright for the gloom of his existence, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to the sound of her waking up. Nia scrambled to her feet, apologizing for oversleeping, her heart racing, as she remembered the events of the previous night, the shattered dinner, the knife in the table, the declaration of war against the people who owned this house, and she wondered if she would be fired or worse, arrested, but Julian just sat there silent and unmoving, waiting for her to perform the duties of a wife that Vera had outlined in the contract. The first task was intimate and terrifying, as Nia led him into the bathroom where the steam from the shower still lingered, and she realized she had to shave him, a task that required a level of trust and proximity that made her hands shake, because she was holding a sharp, straight razor against the throat of a man whose family wanted him dead and whose stepmother had paid her to keep him sedated. She lathered the shaving cream onto his jaw, her fingers grazing the rough stubble, and the warmth of his skin sent a jolt of electricity through her that she hadn't expected, forcing her to focus entirely on the blade as she glided it over his neck, painfully aware that one slip could draw blood. And Julian, for his part, sat unnaturally still, his breath steady, but behind those dark glasses his eyes were tracking her every movement, watching the reflection in the fogged mirror, analyzing the way she bit her lip in concentration, realizing that this woman held his life in her hands quite literally, and instead of fear, he felt a strange sense of calm, because her touch wasn't possessive or cruel, it was gentle, almost reverent. The silence in the bathroom was heavy with unspoken questions until Nia murmured a soft apology for the cold water, explaining that the hot water tap seemed to be broken, which Julian knew was a lie, not from her, but from the house staff, a petty punishment from Vera for the dinner scene, cutting off their comforts to break Nia's spirit. But instead of complaining, Nia just dipped the towel in warm water from the kettle she had boiled herself, improvising to make him comfortable. Once the shaving was done and the tension had dissipated slightly, Nia left him to dress and went downstairs to face the consequences, finding the kitchen empty of staff, with a note from Vera stating that since Nia was so energetic at dinner, she could handle the housekeeping for the West Wing herself, essentially turning the billionaire's wife into a glorified maid. Nia didn't argue, she just rolled up her sleeves and started scrubbing the floors, fueled by the anger burning in her chest and the desperate need to keep the check for Marcus's surgery valid. But while she was distracted, Julian was setting his first real test, because he needed to know if her defense of him was just a performance to gain his trust before she robbed him blind like the others. He moved to the study, a room lined with books he had read 1,000 times, and opened the hidden wall safe, the combination of which he knew by touch, and he deliberately took out a stack of cash amounting to $50,000, leaving it carelessly on the desk as if he had fumbled it, and then he sat in his chair feigning sleep, his head lolled back, his breathing even and deep, waiting for the mouse to find the cheese. Nia entered the study an hour later carrying a tray of tea, her arms aching from the scrubbing, and she froze when she saw the money stacks of $100 bills scattered across the mahogany desk right next to Julian's limp hand, and for a moment the world stopped because that money was right there, untraceable, easy to pocket, enough to pay for Marcus's medication for a year without having to beg Vera for the next installment. Julian watched her through the slit of his eyelids, his heart hardening as he saw her stare at the cash, waiting for the inevitable moment when she would reach out and take it, confirming that she was just another gold digger exploiting a cripple, and he prepared himself for the disappointment, prepared to end the charade and throw her out. Nia took a step forward, her hand reaching out, and Julian's muscles tensed, ready to strike. But then her hand moved past the money and gently touched his shoulder, shaking him awake, softly whispering that he shouldn't leave his things out because the servants might steal them, and then shocking him to his core, she gathered the bills into a neat stack, took his hand, and pressed the money into his palm, closing his fingers over it, telling him to put it away safely because she didn't want him to lose anything else. Julian was stunned, his mind reeling as he felt the rough texture of the paper bills against his skin, and the warmth of her hand over his, realizing that she had just passed a test that 99% of people would have failed, and the guilt of suspecting her began to gnaw at him, mixed with a rising fury at his family for putting this honorable woman in such a desperate position. But the peace didn't last, because as they were heading back to their room later that evening, the lights in the hallway suddenly flickered and died, plunging the corridor into pitch blackness, and Nia gasped, reaching out for Julian, but he was already moving, instinctively shifting his weight because he could see perfectly in the dark thanks to his night vision contact lenses, a secret tech he had developed before the accident. He saw the tripwire stretched across the top of the stairs, a vicious trap set by Eric to send the blind man tumbling down a flight of marble steps to his death or paralysis, and Julian froze, knowing he couldn't step over it without revealing he could see, leaving him with a split-second choice: to fall and get hurt to maintain his cover, or to stop. Before he could decide, Nia's phone flashlight beam cut through the dark, and she screamed, seeing the wire just inches from his shins, and she threw herself in front of him, wrapping her arms around his waist and tackling him backwards away from the stairs, landing hard on the carpet with him on top of her, the breath knocked out of her lungs, but her hands gripping his jacket, tightly protecting him with her own body. They lay there in the dark, tangled together, hearts pounding in unison, and Julian, staring down at her face, illuminated by the scattered light of the phone, felt a crack in the ice around his heart widen into a fissure because she had just saved him from a broken neck without a second thought for her own safety. He wanted to tell her then, wanted to whisper the truth, that he could see her, that she didn't have to be afraid, but footsteps echoed down the hall, and Eric's voice sneered from the shadows, asking if they were enjoying their nap on the floor, proving he was watching, waiting for the crash. Nia scrambled up, pulling Julian with her, her fear turning into a cold fury as she shouted into the darkness that she knew what Eric did, and that he would pay for it, but Eric just laughed and walked away, leaving them in the dark. Back in the room, Nia checked Julian frantically for injuries, her hands roaming over his arms and shoulders, and when she found he was unhurt, she collapsed onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands and beginning to sob, the stress finally breaking her, and Julian stood there listening to her weep, wanting to comfort her, but knowing he couldn't break character yet. Instead, he walked over to the piano in the corner of the room, a dusty grand that hadn't been played in years, and sat down, his fingers hovering over the keys, and he began to play a melody, soft and haunting, a song of gratitude and sorrow, letting the music speak the words he couldn't say, and Nia looked up through her tears, watching the blind man play with a virtuoso skill, realizing there was so much more to Julian Kim than a broken body and a ruined mind. But as the last note faded, Nia's phone buzzed with a text from the hospital, a message that made her blood run cold, stating that Marcus's condition had deteriorated, and they needed the surgery payment immediately, or he would be discharged. And Nia looked at Julian, looked at the man she was starting to care for, and realized she might have to betray him after all, not for greed, but for love. The text message on Nia's phone was a ticking time bomb glowing in the dim light of the bedroom, a cruel reminder that while she was playing house with a billionaire, her real life was bleeding out in a hospital bed miles away. And the desperation clawed at her throat, choking her as she looked at Julian, who sat by the window again, lost in his own world of darkness, or so she thought. She needed the money from Auntie Vera, but Vera had made it clear that payment was contingent on results, and results meant a docile drug Julian, not the man Nia had just saved from a death trap on the stairs. So Nia was trapped in a moral vice, squeezing tighter every second. She excused herself, mumbling a lie about needing fresh air, and slipped out of the room, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet, but Julian heard the hitch in her breath, the unspoken panic, and as soon as the door clicked shut, he was moving, sliding on his dark glasses, which now contained a miniature earpiece connected to the bug he had planted in her purse hours ago. He listened intently as Nia hurried down the hall and into the garden, dialing a number with shaking fingers, her voice cracking as she pleaded with the hospital billing department, begging for just 2 more days, promising the money was coming, swearing on her life, while Julian listened from his chair, his fist clenching so hard his knuckles turned white, realizing that the greed he had suspected was actually terror, and that this woman was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, all for a brother she loved more than herself. A cold fury ignited in Julian's chest, directed not at Nia but at his own family, who were using a dying boy as leverage to turn a good woman into a monster, and he made a decision right then that changed the game entirely. He waited until night fell, until the house was asleep, and then he slipped out of his room, moving through the shadows with the silent grace of a predator, no longer tapping his cane but walking with a lethal confidence, heading for the old stables at the edge of the estate, a place that had been abandoned for years but which secretly housed his command center. Inside the dusty barn, he pushed aside a stack of hay bales to reveal a biometric scanner, scanning his palm to open a hidden door that led down into a high-tech bunker filled with monitors, servers, and equipment that rivaled a government agency where his loyal head of security, a man named Kai, was waiting. Kai looked up as Julian entered, immediately pulling up the live feed of the hospital room where Marcus Brooks lay pale and small, connected to a web of tubes, and Julian stared at the boy, realizing that this was the shackle binding Nia to Vera. "Pay it!" Julian commanded, his voice like steel. "Pay the hospital bill in full. Use a shell company, make it look like an anonymous donor grant. And make sure he gets the best surgeon in the country." Kai typed furiously, executing the order, transferring hundreds of thousands of dollars in seconds, and then looked at Julian with a question in his eyes, asking why he was helping the daughter of the enemy's pawn. Julian didn't answer immediately. He just watched the monitor showing Nia sleeping in a chair next to his bed in their room, unaware that her burden had just been lifted, and said softly, "Because she saved me. Now I save her." But the night wasn't over, because as Julian made his way back to the main house, a storm began to brew outside, thunder rumbling low and ominous, matching the mood inside the mansion where Eric was nursing his bruised ego and a bottle of scotch, plotting his next move. The next morning, Nia woke up to a miracle, a call from the hospital informing her that an anonymous angel donor had covered Marcus's surgery and postoperative care, leaving her sobbing with relief on the balcony, her knees weak with gratitude, thinking it was God or luck, never suspecting the blind husband sitting 10 feet away eating his toast was her savior. With the weight of the money gone, Nia felt a sudden surge of freedom. She no longer needed Vera's check, she no longer had to play by their rules, and she looked at Julian with new eyes, seeing not a job but a human being who was just as trapped as she had been. She decided to take him out to get him away from the toxicity of the house, so she grabbed his hand, pulling him up and announcing they were going for a walk down to the private beach, a place Vera had forbidden them to go because the cliffs were dangerous. They walked along the winding path, the wind whipping Nia's hair across her face, and she guided Julian, carefully describing the ocean, the seagulls, the smell of salt, and Julian listened to her voice, realizing it was the first time in years he had felt peace, actually enjoying the charade. But the peace was shattered when they reached the secluded cove and found Eric waiting for them with 2 of his goons, looking like a scene from a nightmare. Eric smirked, holding a golf club, tapping it against his palm, sneering that he knew Nia hadn't been giving Julian his pills because the cripple was looking too alert, too healthy, and he decided it was time to teach them both a lesson about obedience. The goons moved in, grabbing Nia, roughly dragging her away from Julian, throwing her into the sand, while Eric advanced on Julian, raising the golf club, ready to strike a blow that would shatter bone, laughing that a blind man couldn't fight back. Nia screamed, struggling against the men, shouting for Julian to run, but Julian stood his ground, his head tilted towards the ocean, listening to the waves, or so it seemed, but in reality he was calculating the distance, the wind speed, the angle of attack. As Eric swung the club, aiming for Julian's head, Julian didn't just dodge, he moved like a phantom, stepping inside the swing, his hand shooting out to grab Eric's wrist, twisting it with a sickening crunch that made Eric drop the club and scream in agony. Before the goons could process what was happening, Julian spun, kicking the first man in the knee, shattering it, and then delivering a palm strike to the second man's throat that dropped him gasping for air, all in under 3 seconds, a blur of violence that was terrifyingly efficient. Eric fell back into the sand, clutching his broken wrist, staring up at Julian in horror, gasping, You can see!" And Julian stood over him, his dark glasses reflecting the storm clouds, removing them slowly to reveal eyes that burned with cold fire, whispering, "I see everything, brother, and if you ever touch her again, I won't just break your wrist. I'll break your world." Nia lay in the sand, stunned, silent, unable to comprehend that the invalid she had been protecting was actually a deadly weapon, watching as Julian turned to her, his face softening, instantly reaching out a hand to help her up, asking if she was hurt. But before she could answer, before she could ask the 1,000 questions racing through her mind, a gunshot cracked through the air, echoing off the cliffs, and Julian jerked back, blood blooming on his shoulder, as a sniper hidden in the rocks above took the shot meant to end the heir of the Kim Empire once and for all. If you are on the edge of your seat right now, smashing that like button helps us create more intense episodes just like this, and don't forget to share this with a friend who loves a good plot twist, because what happens next is going to change everything. The sound of the gunshot was swallowed by the roar of the ocean, but the spray of red mist from Julian's shoulder was vivid and horrifying against the gray sky as he stumbled back, his white shirt instantly turning crimson, and Nia screamed, a sound torn from the deepest part of her soul, scrambling through the sand to catch him before he fell. The world narrowed down to the sight of his blood, and the realization that the bullet had come from the cliffs above, meaning this wasn't just Eric's bullying anymore, this was an execution. Julian groaned, his face pale, his secret strength draining away with his blood, but his mind was still sharp, still calculating, and he grabbed Nia's arm with his good hand, his grip iron hard, pulling her behind the cover of a large jagged rock, just as a second bullet sparked off the stone where her head had been a second ago. "Stay down." He rasped, his voice tight with pain but devoid of fear, and Nia stared at him, her hands pressing desperately against his wound, trying to staunch the flow, realizing that the man she thought she knew was a total stranger, a warrior disguised as a victim. "You can see," she whispered, the betrayal and the shock warring with the terror in her eyes. "You could see the whole time." Julian looked at her, his eyes dark with regret and pain, nodding once. "I had to. It was the only way to survive them. But right now, we need to move or we both die." He didn't wait for her forgiveness, he just acted, pulling a small concealed pistol from his ankle holster, a weapon she hadn't even noticed, and firing 3 shots blindly over the rock, providing cover fire, while he dragged her toward a narrow fissure in the cliff face, a hidden smuggler's cave he had discovered years ago. They collapsed inside the damp, dark cave, safe from the sniper's line of sight, but trapped with the tide rising, and Julian slumped against the wall, his breathing shallow, the gun slipping from his fingers. Nia didn't hesitate. She ripped the hem of her dress, tearing long strips of fabric, and wrapped his shoulder tightly, her hands working with the precision of a woman who had spent years caring for the sick, ignoring her own fear to focus on keeping him alive. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling as she tied off the bandage. "Why lie to me? I was trying to help you. I was protecting you." Julian looked up at her, his defenses finally crumbling under the weight of her kindness and the loss of blood. "Because everyone has a price, Nia. Everyone. I thought you were just another pawn Vera sent to kill me slowly. I didn't know. I didn't know you were real." He reached out his bloody hand, brushing a stray curl of hair from her forehead, his touch gentle. "You refused to drug me. You defended me at dinner. You saved me on the stairs. You are the only real thing in my life, Nia. And I fell in love with you before I even saw your face." Nia froze, her heart skipping a beat, the confession hanging in the damp air between them, raw and honest, and for a moment the danger outside ceased to exist, leaving only the two of them in the dark. She looked into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability behind the steel, and realized that her anger was gone, replaced by something deeper, something fierce. "We're getting out of here," she said, firmly grabbing his hand. "And then you are going to take down everyone who did this to you, including your stepmother." As if summoned by her words, Julian's phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from Kai confirming the sniper had been neutralized and an extraction team was inbound. But the text also contained a terrifying image, a photo of the hospital room where Marcus's bed was empty. Vera had found out about the anonymous payment. She knew Julian was making moves, and she had taken Marcus. The color drained from Nia's face as Julian showed her the screen, her worst nightmare realized. "She has him," Nia whispered, her voice breaking. "She has my brother." Julian's face hardened, the pain in his shoulder forgotten, replaced by a cold, lethal rage that made the temperature in the cave drop. He stood up, using the cave wall for support, and reloaded his gun with a click that sounded like a judge's gavel. "She made a mistake," Julian said, his voice low and terrifying. "She thought she was kidnapping a pawn's brother. She didn't realize she was kidnapping family." He turned to Nia, holding out his hand. "Trust me one last time, Nia. We are going back to the mansion. Not as victims. As executioners." Nia looked at his hand, looked at the blood staining his shirt, and then looked into his eyes, seeing a promise of retribution that matched the fire in her own heart. She took his hand, squeezing it tight. "Let's go get my brother." They emerged from the cave as the sun began to set, casting the world in blood-red light, and climbed into the waiting black SUV that Kai had sent speeding back towards the Kim mansion, ready to burn it to the ground. If you are loving this intensity and want to see the Kim family get what they deserve, make sure you comment Team NIA below and subscribe right now, because the finale is going to be explosive and you need to be there when the king takes his throne back. The black armored SUV tore through the iron gates of the Kim estate, smashing the lock with a screech of twisted metal that signaled the end of diplomacy and the beginning of war. While inside the vehicle, Julian sat in silence, his shoulder bandaged but bleeding slowly, soaking the white dress shirt, while Nia gripped his good hand so tight her fingernails dug into his skin, her eyes fixed on the looming mansion that looked less like a home and more like a fortress of shadows. They weren't sneaking in this time, they were driving straight to the front door, because the time for shadows was over. And when the car screeched to a halt at the bottom of the grand staircase, Julian turned to Nia, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity, telling her that no matter what she saw in there, she had to trust him. And she nodded, swallowing the lump of terror in her throat, because her brother was in that house and she would burn the world down to get him back. Kai, the head of security, kicked the front doors open, flanking Julian as they stormed into the grand foyer, where the air was thick with tension and the smell of expensive lilies, unable to mask the stench of betrayal. Waiting for them in the main drawing room sat Auntie Vera, calm and composed, sipping tea as if she hadn't just ordered a hit on her stepson, while Eric stood by the fireplace, nursing his shattered wrist in a sling, his face a mask of sweaty fear and hatred. But what stopped Nia's heart cold was the sight of a wheelchair in the corner, where Marcus sat, pale and trembling, hooked up to a portable oxygen tank, looking small and terrified in the vast room. "Marcus!" Nia screamed, breaking away from Julian's side, running across the polished marble floor, sliding to her knees beside her brother, checking him frantically for injuries, her hands shaking as she cupped his face, tears streaming down her cheeks, while Vera just watched with a cold reptilian smile, setting her teacup down with a delicate clink. "So emotional," Vera drawled, her voice dripping with poison. "I told you, Julian, the girl is a liability. You should have died on the beach. It would have been cleaner." Julian stepped forward, leaving his cane at the door, a symbolic gesture that Vera missed in her arrogance, and he walked toward her, not with the shuffling gait of a blind man, but with the predatory stalk of a tiger, his voice low and echoing off the high ceilings. "Where is he, Vera?" Julian asked, referring to the sniper, but Vera just laughed, waving a hand, dismissively telling him that he was in no position to ask questions when she held the only thing his little pet cared about. She pulled a document from the table, sliding it across the surface, a transfer of power agreement that would sign the entire Kim Corporation over to Eric, leaving Julian with nothing. "Sign it," Vera commanded, pulling a small silver pistol from her purse, pointing it not at Julian but at Marcus. "Sign it and the boy lives. Refuse, and the sister watches him die." Nia gasped, shielding Marcus with her body, looking back at Julian with pleading eyes, begging him without words to save them, but also knowing that signing that paper was a death sentence for him too. The room went silent, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock and the ragged breathing of Marcus. Julian looked at the paper, then looked at Vera, his expression unreadable. "You think you've won," he said softly. "You think because you have a gun and a hostage that you are in control. But you forgot one thing, Vera. You forgot to ask why I played the cripple for 3 years." He took another step forward, ignoring the gun pointed at the innocent boy. "I didn't do it to hide. I did it to watch, to record, to gather every single dirty secret you buried." Vera's smile faltered slightly, her grip on the gun tightening as she asked what he was talking about. Julian reached into his pocket, but instead of a pen, he pulled out a small remote and pressed a button. Suddenly, the massive 80-inch television screen above the fireplace flickered to life, blaring audio at maximum volume. It was a recording of Vera's voice, clear as day, negotiating with a hitman 3 years ago, ordering the tampering of Julian's car brakes. Then another recording of her discussing the embezzlement of millions into offshore accounts. Then a video from the dining room taken from a hidden camera in Julian's glasses, showing her admitting to the plan to drug him. The color drained from Vera's face, leaving her looking like a ghost as the evidence of her crimes played on a loop for everyone to see, including the household staff who had gathered in the doorway. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, her composure cracking, shattering like cheap glass. "I said turn it off!" She waved the gun wildly, turning it toward Julian, now her hand shaking. "I'll kill you! I'll kill you all!" Eric, terrified by his mother's unraveling, tried to grab her arm, shouting that it was over, but she shoved him away with a strength born of madness, her eyes wide and wild. "No one takes this from me. I built this company. It's mine. Julian didn't flinch, he didn't blink. He just kept walking toward her slowly, steadily, his eyes locked on hers, his voice cutting through her hysteria like a blade. It's over, Vera. The police are already at the gate. Kai sent the files 10 minutes ago. You aren't the matriarch anymore. You're just a murderer. Vera let out a scream of pure rage and pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, a thunderclap of violence that made Nia scream and curl over her brother, expecting the worst. But Julian didn't fall. He had moved with that impossible speed again, stepping to the side as the bullet shattered a vase behind him, and in one fluid motion, he closed the distance, grabbing the barrel of the gun, twisting it up and out of her hand, forcing her to her knees with a painful wrench of her arm. He stood over her, breathing hard, his shoulder bleeding fresh blood, but looking like a god of vengeance, holding the gun he had wrestled from her. I could kill you, he whispered, so only she could hear the barrel hovering inches from her forehead. For what you did to my father. For what you did to me. For threatening her. Vera looked up at him, trembling, crying now, pleading for mercy, but looking into his eyes, she saw no mercy, only justice. But I'm not you, Julian said, loudly tossing the gun away onto the carpet with disgust. I don't need bullets to destroy you. The truth is enough. Sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder, coming up the driveway, the sound of salvation and judgment finally arriving. Nia sobbed with relief, hugging Marcus tight, rocking him back and forth, while Eric slumped against the wall, defeated, knowing his life of luxury was over. Julian turned to Nia, his adrenaline fading, leaving him swaying slightly, the blood loss finally catching up to him. He offered her a weak smile, a real smile, trying to tell her it was okay, but his legs gave out and he collapsed to the floor, his vision going black as Nia screamed his name, scrambling toward him, her hands covered in his blood again, begging him to stay awake. If you are screaming at your screen right now, praying that Julian survives, you need to hit that subscribe button immediately and drop a comment saying, "Save Julian." Because we are heading into the final chapter, and you do not want to miss the ending of this saga. Share this video with everyone you know because this love story deserves to be seen. The room spun around Nia as paramedics burst through the doors, flanking the police officers who were handcuffing a screaming Vera, but Nia didn't care about justice. She only cared about the man lying pale and still on the marble floor, the man who had walked through fire for her. And as they loaded him onto the stretcher, she grabbed his cold hand, whispering a promise that she wouldn't let him go, that their contract wasn't over yet. But as the ambulance doors closed, shutting her out, leaving her standing in the driveway of the house she had hated, she realized that the battle was won, but the war for his life was just beginning. The hospital waiting room was a purgatory of white walls and the smell of antiseptic, where time seemed to stretch and warp, losing all meaning as Nia paced back and forth, a worn path in the linoleum, her dress still stained with Julian's dried blood, drawing stares from the nurses, but she didn't care because her heart was behind the double doors where a team of surgeons was trying to repair the damage a bullet and years of trauma had done to Julian Kim. Marcus was safe, settled in a private recovery room down the hall, the best pediatric cardiologists in the city attending to him, paid for by the Kim estate, but Nia couldn't rest, couldn't sit, couldn't breathe, until she knew that the man who had saved them both was going to open his eyes again. It had been 6 hours since they wheeled him, in 6 hours of silence, interrupted only by the news playing on the TV in the corner, showing footage of Auntie Vera and Eric being led away in handcuffs, the Billionaire family scandal. Breaking across every network, the world finally seeing the monsters for who they were and Julian for the hero he had been hiding. Finally, the doors opened and a surgeon stepped out, looking exhausted, pulling off his mask, and Nia froze, holding her breath, praying for a miracle. "Mrs. Kim?" the doctor asked, and the title hit her hard, a reminder that their marriage was fake, a contract born of desperation, but in that moment it felt more real than anything else in her life. "He's stable," the doctor said, a tired smile touching his lips. "He lost a lot of blood and the shoulder injury was severe, but he's a fighter. He's asking for you." Nia let out a sob of relief, her knees buckling slightly before she rushed past the doctor into the recovery room, where the rhythmic beep of the monitor was the sweetest music she had ever heard. Julian lay in the bed, pale against the white sheets, his shoulder heavily bandaged and 4 drip in his arm, but his eyes, those eyes she had thought were blind for so long, were open and focused on the door, waiting for her. She walked to his side, her emotions a tidal wave she couldn't control, and she reached out, taking his hand, expecting him to pull away now that the danger was over, now that the contract was fulfilled. But he didn't pull away, he squeezed her fingers, his grip weak but present. "Hey!" he rasped, his voice dry. "Did we win?" Nia laughed, a wet, tearful sound, wiping her eyes with her free hand. "We won, Julian. Vera is in jail." Eric is talking to the feds. Marcus is safe. You did it. Julian shook his head, slightly wincing at the movement. No, we did it. I would still be sitting in that dark room if you hadn't walked in and refused to pour those pills into my water. He looked at her, searching her face with an intensity that made her blush. Nia, the contract, Vera's deal. It's void now. You have the money for Marcus. You're free. You can leave. You can get an annulment and disappear like you wanted. The words hung in the air, heavy and final, offering her the escape she had prayed for at the beginning, the freedom from the dangerous world of the Kims. Nia looked at the door, the exit, the path to a simple, safe life, and then she looked back at Julian, the complicated, broken, beautiful man who had taken a bullet for her. She thought about the way he played the piano in the dark, the way he held her in the cave, the way he looked at her when he thought she couldn't see. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the crumpled check Vera had given her weeks ago, the symbol of her servitude, and slowly, deliberately, she tore it in half, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. I'm not going anywhere, Nia whispered, leaning down until her forehead rested against his, her breath mingling with his. You still owe me a real date. One where nobody shoots at us. Julian let out a breath. He seemed to have been holding for years, a smile breaking across his face that reached his eyes, making them sparkle. I think I can manage that, he whispered back. But I have a confession to make. Nia pulled back, slightly smiling. What? That you can fly too? Julian chuckled, wincing. No, it's about the gold digger test. The money on the desk. The insults. It was all a test to see if you were like the others. Nia rolled her eyes, playfully pretending to be offended. And? Did I pass? Julian's expression turned serious, his eyes locking onto hers, filled with a love that terrified and thrilled her. Nia, you didn't just pass the test. You rewrote the whole damn exam. You saw me when no one else did. You loved the man in the dark. So I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be in the dark again. He reached up, cupping her cheek, pulling her down for a kiss that wasn't part of a contract, wasn't for show, wasn't a lie. It was a promise, a seal on a future they would build together from the ashes of the past. As they kissed, the camera pulls back out of the hospital room through the window, panning up to the night sky where the storm clouds have cleared, revealing a brilliant full moon shining down on the city, a symbol of truth revealed and love conquering the shadows. The screen fades to black, but the story isn't over for them, it's just beginning. Thank you so much for watching this journey. If you cried, if you cheered, if you fell in love with Julian and Nia, please give this video a massive thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more epic romances and heart-stopping dramas. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and let us know in the comments what you want to see next. Thanks for being part of the Real Rush family. We'll see you in the next episode.